Over here to my immediate right, I have Judge Oscar Hale. He's from Webb County, the 406 District Court, and the Veterans Court. He was elected to the bench in 2004. In 2013, he implemented the Webb County Veteran Court program together with Judge Becky Paloma, over here to his right, of the 341st District Court. Judge Hale is responsible for a number of initiatives in Webb County. He, in 2007, he started the Let's All Rise to Challenge initiative for teenagers at risk of developing a drug addiction. In 2009, he started the District Adult Drug Court Program. And 2009 also, it's a busy year for you, courts and schools. He would take the courts into the schools and provide real-world lessons for students, getting to see the justice system up close. And in 2010, started the Sobriety treatment program. And in 2013, Judge Hale was awarded the Power of Partnership and Recognition of the Elite for supporting local veterans in need of assistance. So I would like you all to give him a warm welcome. Now, Judge Becky Paloma, to his right, is a former prosecutor. In 2012, she was elected to the bench. She has a BBA from UT Austin and a JD from right here in San Antonio, St. Mary's University. She currently presides over the Webb County Sobriety Treatment Court. She works closely with Judge Hale. I think they're sort of a tag team, aren't you? Or a dynamic duo, whichever you prefer. And she helps with the Veterans Court and the Courts and Schools program. She was recently recognized by the Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans for her contributions to local veterans. I'd like you all to give her a warm welcome. And to her right is Evan Robbins from Cameron County. He's a prosecutor, the assistant DA, and veteran court prosecutor. He has a BS in Justice Studies from Arizona State, a JD from Brigham Young University. It looks like Evan graduated summa cum laude while also working full-time for the campus police department. I am told he never got invited to a campus party at Arizona State. Is that true? He's an Air Force veteran. Go Air Force.
Yes.
He held a number of interesting positions after his military career, including police officer, detective, college professor, private practice attorney, and swimming pool contractor.
Only well.
The Cameron County Veteran Court was recently established, and Mr. Robbins is firmly committed to serving the needs of veterans in that county. Please welcome him. And to our far right, we have Randy Parker from right here in Bexar County. He is a former defense counsel and now the director of the Veteran Treatment Court Program. He's a lieutenant colonel from the Army, retired. He retired after 23 years of active duty, and he has served as an assistant criminal DA in Bexar County. He was born and raised in Texas. He has a BBA from A&M Kingsville and a JD from Baylor Law. He's licensed before all the state courts of Texas, U.S. military courts, U.S. district courts for the western and southern districts of Texas, and the U.S. Supreme Court. You never told me that, Randy. In 1999, he went into private practice until October 2013 when he was hired away by Judge Christian to be the project director of the Bexar County Veterans Treatment Court, and we are so glad to have you here. Judge Hale brought us something for our viewing pleasure. So we are going to play that, and then we'll get started with the panel discussion.
My name is Sergeant Anthony Montgomery.
my first session with Mr. King, my counselor, he showed me things about myself which I thought I already knew. His knowledge and experience alone would have sufficed, but to know that he's there for himself and relate with what I was going through was definitely a reason for me to continue the program. I learned and continue to learn about different tools and techniques to control my thoughts, along with the constant I've had the opportunity and pleasure to meet other BTP staff members that helped me with my professional case. It truly was a blessing to know that I wasn't in this fight by myself, that I had a team of professionals who helped me through that time of my life. Being on active duty, I have resources I can use for treatment. The difference between those resources and the BTP is that with the BTP, you feel like they genuinely care and you're not just another problem. I can sincerely say that thanks to the Veterans Treatment Program, I am in a better place in my life.
Hello, my name is Blair Montesco. The Veteran Treatment Program is what's getting my life back on track. As a veteran, I found it difficult to speak to people about my feelings and be open about my problems. So having a counselor who has shared my military experience has broken down the communication barrier that has kept me from seeking help. I can feel the change after every session that I'm getting a bit healthier and happier. I've been given the opportunity to better myself holistically so I can once again be a productive and successful man. This program is attacking the problems veterans have on multiple fronts. I can pick up the phone any time of day and contact one of various program mentors who are there to listen, give advice, and provide help. That dedication on behalf of the VTP makes me feel like it's never too late to turn things around. And has renewed my faith that the community has not forgotten or set aside their warriors when they take off their uniforms.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us, Judge Hale. Would you like to share how you came to bring that to us?
Sure. Good afternoon. We actually were working on a PowerPoint presentation, and one of the ideas that Judge Paloma and I had was to get some participants to give a testimonial, because when they come before us, they share their stories with us, and sometimes we just wish there were more people there to listen or to hear what they have to say. And at the last hearing that I had before this group, I told them that we were going to be coming up here, and I wanted to share some of the stories that they were sharing with us. But I said, you know what, it'd be better if they hear it from you directly instead of me just saying what you told me. And so we decided to bring the testimonials so that we can show you how some of our participants feel about being a part of or participant in our veteran treatment program. So that's why we decided to bring that.
Thank you. It's we just talked about that the last session. You know how persuasive it is for these treatment programs, the veteran court programs, to have the actual testimony, and it really, it brings home exactly why we're here and why we're talking about all of these things. And with that, we're going to talk about ethics of court participation and competing roles, and talk about the best practices and handling some of the ethical issues that the courts face, when normally the criminal process is adversarial, and in this case, it has to be a collaborative effort, but there are still these concerns about confidentiality and, prosecutors making sure justice is served, and everyone has their job that they're tied to, but they sort of step out of that role temporarily. And so we want to talk about that today. And I guess we can start off by asking, I'll start with Judge Paloma. Will you discuss the roles of the judge, the DA, defense counsel, probation officers, the members of your veteran treatment court?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. With the program, the Veterans Treatment Program in Webb County, there's different players. Of course, it's driven by the judge. And aside from the judge, and the district attorney's office, of course, plays one of the main roles. And getting them to buy into the program is something maybe we could discuss later on this afternoon. But once the district attorney's on board, then we get the probation department is also part of our disciplinary team. And the way the Webb County Veterans Treatment Program works is we have our internal LCDCs that are the ones that provide the treatment and counseling services to the participants in the VTP program. And we were able to design our program that way with the funding that we've received, the grant funding that we've received. Other than that is just the probation officers and the case managers, and just working closely with them on a weekly basis. You wanted to say something?
No, go ahead.
The way the Webb County Veterans Treatment Program works is Judge Hill and I operate it together, and we meet every other Tuesday. We meet on a bi-monthly basis. We meet every other Tuesday in the afternoon, and all of the participants must come to court. And so that's what makes up the team for the Webb County VTP program.
I wanted just to add.
Please do.
Obviously, we have a
And
process.
I want to just tell you all, we have some structured questions here. I listed mostly from you all, but, as we go along, I want you to jump in and tell us about, the issues that you've encountered and follow up on each other's responses, because it's a discussion.
Okay.
And then we will stop at some point and take questions from the audience.
Okay.
but-
Yes, I just wanted to add.
No, please.
Obviously, we have a prosecutor and a defense attorney here on the panel, and as you mentioned earlier, everyone plays a role. And as I'm sure in every other program, and Judge Sanchez has this program as well in Cameron County, the district attorney's office, and in particular the assistant DA who is in charge or assigned to handle drug court, plays a vital role, because they have to screen the cases, and unlike just regular intake cases, they have to screen them to make sure that it's an offense that I guess is within the policy of the particular office. In other words, allowing this particular case, even if they meet the criteria under the statute or under your grant, every individual DA's office, I imagine, has their own criteria and policies as to who they would allow to participate in the program. And so that's the first step. And then the defense attorneys, as is required by statute, also have to be available to counsel the participants and let them know what their rights are, that it's a voluntary program, that they can withdraw at any point. And the contract, we have a contract, I'm not sure if all programs have a contract, but we do have a contract that they sign. It's something we adopted from our drug court program and sobriety treatment program. And so, and of course, the defense attorney and the prosecutor are both present. The staffings are present during court proceedings, especially when there's sanctions involved, or certainly when there's a termination hearing. And I think there's maybe some ethical issues that we'll discuss a little bit later on that. And of course, as a judge, our role also is, we participate in general meetings. I don't participate in staffings, in the voting part of it. But we meet every other week in our program. And of course, that's where we determine whether to accept or reject the recommendation from the committee, or modify it if we need to. And one last thing I wanted to point out, because this was discussed earlier at the previous panel with Judge Sanchez was on, one of the differences that I see in from regular drug court to veterans program is the discipline that the participants have. It's just, for one example, one of the participants who gave a testimonial earlier, I think it was his second appearance before me, and he missed a meeting. He had a conflict with his employment, but he made it up the following day. But because he didn't make it or didn't attend when he was scheduled to, he understood that he was not in full compliance, even though they allowed him to make up the session. So when he showed up to court on his own initiative, he brought in an apology letter that he wanted to read to me in front of the other participants as to why he missed the meeting, and understanding that it was not an excuse, and that he was going to not let it happen again. Now, for those of us who participated in regular drug court, that's something that never happens. Sometimes we use that as a sanction, write a letter about why you shouldn't miss a meeting, or why you should not miss your UA. Or anyway, just wanted to comment on that.
If I can just add something too, Karen. The dynamics of a particular prosecutor's office is really going to have an impact on what your role is as the prosecutor that's assigned to the Veterans Court. I have a great supportive boss, and there was a lot of things that were done before I ever got turned towards the Veterans Court process. I was the felony intake supervisor, so some of you in prosecutors and DA's offices, your first assistant is screening some of the cases and stuff like that, determining. I do it all. I was looking at all the felony cases, and I dismiss or refuse to prosecute with little or no oversight from anybody higher ranking than I in the office. So whenever I transition to the Veterans Court, it's mine as well. I mean, maybe that's just plausible deniability, so if I screw up, it's all going to be on me. But so I have great support from the elected official. So I get to just, if I say so, then it's so, for all felonies that come into our office, pretty much. I'm also in charge of what's presented to grand jury. So with that encompassing role as it comes into the office, it gives me a lot of control and say over how they get into the vet court. Also, we had a drug court already in existence, and for those of you that are trying to get an alternative treatment court started and you don't have anything at all like that, it's probably going to be much more difficult. We already had some buy-in with the idea of alternatives to incarceration. We had a pretrial diversion program that you could do for misdemeanors and first-time offenders. So the idea of having alternatives was already pretty well accepted. So we didn't have to overcome that great hurdle of just considering them. So that helps a lot, and it'll be a lot different for each office probably.
That is true, and they're very fortunate to have, you in that role in your county, because, that is one of the, the greatest obstacles that I've heard for starting the court and continuing that is to have a prosecutor who understands, the benefit of the court and what, what can come of it, versus, why are we, pulling veterans out and treating them specially. So that's good to know. It's
And I have only been called upstairs to explain one. We had one that was an intoxication manslaughter that we accepted into our program. But he has both PTSD and the traumatic brain injury. He was riding a motorcycle in the rain from the VFW after having a few drinks, and he runs into a bicyclist. I mean, what are the odds, And so just the totality of the circumstances that I was able to review as the intake supervisor helped to make that determination then as to whether it was going to be appropriate to consider for the vet court. And I did explain that to him, and it was acceptable, and said, okay, fine, just, make sure we have good reasons.
That was always what I was told as a prosecutor. They gave us great discretion, but you had to have a reason why you deviated from that. And so we want to get more into that. But I want to ask you all, for the purpose of the audience, what types of offenses your courts will see. Are they felonies or misdemeanors or both? Drugs primarily, alcohol, that sort of thing. Oh, well, I'll start here and work down.
Yes, in our program, it's a hybrid court. We have jurisdiction over felonies and misdemeanors, and we handle cases involving drugs or alcohol. We've had thefts, burglaries, assaults. That's what we've seen so far, those type of charges. And so if we try to be more inclusive, so as opposed to exclusive, we try and include everyone within reason, I guess, and also within the approval of the DA's office. And so that's pretty much how we handle our cases.
And Evan, so you all do felonies?
Yeah, really, I think probably the DA's office is the one that determines, for most of these courts, what's going to be acceptable and what's not.
Right.
It's not that the judge, Judge Sanchez in the back there, he was encouraging me to, accept as wide of a range as possible as we could, but ultimately it's up to the prosecutor if they're going to get on board. A lot of the earlier sessions, they only do misdemeanors because that's all they can sell to the prosecutor to do. And so, it's going to be up to them ultimately. We only have a few bright line rules on ours, and we borrowed some, I think, from Harris County, most of our guidelines. No sexual offenses, no 3G offenses, no delivery of controlled substance offenses. So as long as you're not selling drugs. Other than that, we'll take every other felony, as long as there is, again, that nexus of some sort between the PTSD or the traumatic brain injury and the offense. So I don't imagine we will ever accept a felony bribery or robbery. I know that would be very difficult to tie in. But if it's a violent offense or they're homeless, you get the overly enthusiastic police officers sometimes that'll charge a shoplifting as a robbery because they pushed the clerk on their way out the door. So now it's a felony instead of a misdemeanor. And those kind of things we might, but if it's in-home invasion and stuff, I don't see they would ever be accepted. But the only bright lines are the 3G, the sex offenses, and delivery.
Well, I think you heard Judge Reed yesterday, Susan Reed, the Bexar County District Attorney. Right now, our court is a misdemeanor court, and that's Wayne Christian's court in County Court 6. The primary types of cases are DWIs, assault, bodily injury, some threats, criminal mischief, possession of marijuana. No thefts. No thefts. It's a crime of moral turpitude. You're either a thief or you're not. So we can't, it's hard to connect that to PTSD or TBI or something like that. Now, we had our 100th graduate a couple months ago now. We recognized our 100th graduate of our court. And so I sent out an invitation to the elected officials to include the district attorney, Susan Reed, and she came down. And we recognized the 100th graduate who was a PFC out of the Army, a PTSD, came back all messed up. He was getting his treatment here in Bexar County at the Veterans Hospital here. He lived with his grandmother. And for the first year he was here, he barely said 5 words to her because he was just internalizing everything. He committed a DWI. He got in our program. He got involved in group sessions and other sessions out at the Veterans Administration. And he turned out to be our 100th graduate. And so I talked to the BJO and I said, look, the 100th graduate is PFC Casper. Do you think he'll be able to stand in front of the group and tell the group what happened in his life? And she said, I'll work on it. Well, he did. And he told the group some of these testimonials up here about the effect of the Veterans Treatment Court on his life. Present in the room were his mother and his grandmother. And they were both blown away by how great the program had been for this young man. Susan Reed was there. Not only did she stay for obviously that part of the graduation as we recognize a 100th graduate, but she stayed. The other elected officials all got up and left. They had other things to do as we were going through the rest of her docket. She stayed. And she stayed for their entire docket. And so she pulled down her first assistant. And he was sitting there too, and they're kind of whispering back and forth to each other about these kinds of cases. So I went over there with my docket and let her first assistant look at my docket. Our docket's got 30 pages and 100 plus participants and what all their problems were. The very next week, she called a meeting between Judge Christian, our Chief of Judicial Services, and I think the first assistant was there too, and started talking about going into felonies. And that's what she was talking about yesterday. So I think we're going to go there. I think we're going to expand our program to go into felonies. And I think it's primarily going to be substance abuse, DWI, maybe a few controlled substances. Getting her to go with major assaults isn't going to happen. She's pretty tough. But the other thing that we did is we invited her on our nickel to go to Anaheim to the conference at the end of May. And so she's going to be there as well. And I said, have you ever been to a drug conference or a vet conference? And the answer was no. So we're getting them to go. We have a mental health court. We have a misdemeanor drug court. We've got a felony drug court. Now we've got the Veterans Treatment Court. So we've got all these specialty courts, and they all kind of work together. And so we're getting our DA on board with as much of these things as we can, and that's what you all have to do in trying to get a successful program. We're not there yet. We're working hard at it.
If I can just add, from our experience, and I think most courts that are up and running will probably say the same thing, the types of offenses that veterans commit because of the PTSD and the TBI kind of self-segregate into certain categories. So a lot of these, well, what if you get one of these, what if you get one of those, you're probably never going to see those because that isn't the types of offenses that are delivered and I guess exhibited in the veterans that are suffering from these things. So even though we take all types of felonies, the majority, probably at least 50%, are DWI or DWI thirds. So it's just because that's the things that they do. So I think a lot of the fear factor for prosecutors' offices is, oh, we're going to open the door and all these things just because they're a veteran, we're going to get all these. And that's not turning out to be true in our experience. That they just don't commit that wide of a range of offenses. You can pretty much say what they're going to be doing.
That's true. Before we move on to another topic, I just wanted to comment on something that Mr. Robbins said earlier, is that the district attorney's office is the one that ultimately, I guess, decides what case they will allow into the Veterans Treatment Program. And while that's true, once the district attorney's office negotiates a plea where they're going to offer the defendant probation, then at that point when the judge is sentencing the defendant and accepting a probation plea, then the judge can order the defendant into the Veterans Treatment Program. So once the DA opens up the case or negotiates the case into probation, then that's when the judge can send the participant into the Veterans Treatment Program. We work very closely with our probation department, and the probation department is also well aware of if they identify a veteran that's already on probation and is not part of the treatment program, for them to start the process to refer them into the treatment program so that they may receive the services and the counseling for PTSD that normally a veteran wouldn't receive on regular probation. And so I just wanted to touch up on that.
And that's what I was considering was more of the pretrial diversion type. You know, if a judge finds somebody or adjudicates them, puts them on deferred or whatever, they can do whatever they want with them. At that point, it's out of the prosecutor's hands. And that's what our neighboring county, Hidalgo, had to do because their DA wouldn't get on board with anything. So their judge would just sentence and send them to the Veterans Court. But we wanted to be involved in the process as our DA's office, and so we do most of ours as pretrial diversion. We do have some that we just identified were already in the system. Maybe we're already on probation since we just got started in January, and we've adopted them into, even though they've already been adjudicated and placed on regular probation. Most of those that are new coming into the program are getting a deferred pretrial type of diversion program.
That's what I was going to add also, that we just started our program as well, as Judge Paloma touched on the probation. We're identifying quite a few probationers who were veterans who obviously didn't have the benefit of participating in the program because it didn't exist before, when they were first placed on probation. So,
Mr. Robbins, have you established some guidelines to try to determine who could be eligible or who couldn't? I listened very closely with Mr. Parker and yourself as you were talking, and I noticed one is from Bexar County and the other is from Cameron County, which is you, the prosecutor. How do you determine whether or not, for example, the involuntary manslaughter, the motorcycle, he was diagnosed with PTSD. Is this an isolated case, or would you have already established some guidelines how to go about it to determine the eligibility of the
Prosecutorial discretion. Yeah, there is no, it's like I said, the only bright line rules for those three categories of offenses, if it's 3G or sex offense or delivery. Other than that, it's me as the prosecutor in that court in charge of that side of our program that will determine whether or not I want to say we should or shouldn't. We have refused a couple of people, mostly because they were already been to prison, or they had another prison sentence coming, or they were getting revoked on another, and this is just a new offense they got. But I think we have maybe two that we called that have come forward that we've said, forget it. But there is no other specific guideline book created at this point. It's all
then
case by case.
prosecutor's discretion.
Yeah, we review it and look at it. Like I say, in my position, it's easy because I get all the cases from the day they come in from the police department. So I can meet with the officers as they bring them into our office and follow up on them. And sometimes, in fact, I can get in touch with them because we know they're in jail before their report gets to me sometimes.
See, the reason I asked you that question, you were a police officer, you were an investigator, and so on, so that gives you a different point of view and the regular prosecutor because of what you had experienced in your background. And that's the reason I was very curious to find out how you determine whether or not, because the concept of the way the Veterans Court works is for everybody who's a veteran, and that's not true.
Correct.
And I hadn't heard that answer, but it serves its purpose.
Yeah. The Dr. Pujols is here as well and on our team, and she's the one that we look to really for that nexus, the connection between their condition and the offense. Now we know that DWI and substance abuse offenses are common among those with PTSD. So we kind of go into it with the presumption that they are related. I don't sit there and say, okay, was this particular drinking instance this night that they got in trouble because they were having an episode, or can we just understand once Dr. Pujols has screened them and talked to them and made a diagnosis that they do have PTSD, that it's likely that the alcohol that they consumed that night is their way of coping. And so we will kind of take that into consideration in the exercise of our discretion.
I have a question just for clarification on the probation cases that you all talked about. Are you saying that when they're on probation, are you still looking for that nexus? Does the doctor still find that nexus when they're on probation and they're allowed into the Veterans Court, or do you not do that?
We actually have 2 licensed professional counselors who are combat veterans. They serve as our case managers, so they do the clinical assessment. Yes, they're identified as veterans, not just because they're veterans, they're identified as veterans, and then they go through the screening process, and if they're eligible, meet the criteria, and are willing to participate, then we obviously make the program available to them, because as we all know, it's a voluntary program, so we don't add it as a condition for the veterans. We can't revoke them if they don't comply with it. They can withdraw at any time. So we do screen them.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to be clear for the audience. Now, does Webb County do pretrial or post adjudication, or both?
Both pre and post adjudication.
And Mr. Robbins, you do more pre?
Yeah, but all of those that are new to the program are on a pre-adjudication track right now. But we do have some that we've grandfathered in that are on regular probation. And what we discussed and anticipate for those that successfully complete it will move to early terminate their probation at the end of the vet court process if they've successfully done that and still have time left.
Right.
But again, that's where you run into some of the issues because you can't early terminate for DWI thirds and that kind of stuff. So those are some of the issues that we'll deal with down the road.
Mm-hmm. Our program is typically 1 year. We
do up to 2 since we're doing felonies.
Yeah, okay. Well, misdemeanors, we go 1 year. We only have about 10 to maybe 12% pretrial diversions. I've heard some people say 100%. I think Travis said 90% pretrial diversion, track 1. I'd like to see us get up to 50% track 1. We're not there yet. You saw my DA yesterday. She's pretty tough, but we're working on it. We're trying to do some good things, but I think if they could just loosen up a little bit more, we would have instead of 125, I'd probably have 200 in the program. Because there's so many that they get the offer and they say, well, no, I'm not interested. And, the Veterans Treatment Court program is more intensive than regular probation. They have to show up to court, at least in the first 2 phases, at least twice a month. And they're visiting with their probation officer, and they're visiting with their treatment counselors, and they're participating in groups, and they're doing everything. So it's a very, very intensive program. It's not a free ride. It is not a free ride because we're trying to change behavior. We're trying to create productive citizens here. So sometimes it's going to take a little bit longer. But anyway, so we're only about 10 to 12% free trial diversions track 1.
So I want to ask you all how you handle the recidivism issues in your counties and talk about those ethical concerns and how, sanctions come in and how you handle those. Because, as judges and prosecutors and Randy in your former defense counsel role, you have the hat that you wear, but you sort of cast that aside for a while. like with the judges, you all, become privy to information that the defense counsel would normally allow you to have if it were a traditional adversarial situation. So how do you handle that? How do you wrestle with that balancing act?
I think Judge Paloma and I have talked about it to a certain extent. We have not had any termination hearings yet in our veterans program, and hopefully we won't have any. But we've talked about, since we're both handling the program, maybe it's individuals that we preside over or that come to our court, that perhaps the other judge will handle the termination hearing. Or if both of us are handling the docket with the same participants, then perhaps asking another judge to sit in at the termination hearing. And same thing for revocation. If a person gets terminated, we're talking from our experience as drug court judges as well. And so if you have a person who is terminated from the program while on probation, and now they're going to come up for an application to revoke their probation, and you know everything about them because they've been seeing you every day for the last 12 months. So in those situations, I think probably the best way to handle it is to have another judge preside over the revocation to avoid any ethical issues.
Yeah. Well, what we do actually is Judge Sanchez is only the supervisory judge for the Veterans Court program. So if there's an MTR, an MTA or something, some kind of revocation action, it's going to go back to their court of original jurisdiction where they started. So we don't transfer them into our court, we just transfer the supervision. So the case file and everything else still stays back with its original court.
And that's a good point. Actually, when we started off, not all the judges were on board. This is before Judge Paloma took office. So some of the judges were reluctant. They said, well, I don't want to just assign it, and then they don't complete the program, and then they come back to me and have to deal with the case again. So I'd rather just transfer it. And to me, you know what? Transfer it. I'll deal with it. I'll handle the case. And so I have quite a few cases that were transferred from the misdemeanor court to county court of laws or other district courts, and ended up staying on my docket, and so that's how I ended up having to figure out how to handle those cases at the revocation point.
And then I also have some that are true pretrial diversion that haven't even been assigned a cause number, that there was early intervention, their defense attorney came right away, referred them to the Veterans Court. We got them down there, they swore in, we barely got the police report to the DA's office. So they don't even have a cause number yet, and they're in our court. And that's the true pretrial diversion type of a format. So in that case, we may never even file those for a cause number, and there isn't a judge other than the supervisory one. We're taking them on as kind of face value. You guys want help? We're here to help you. And that's really what we're focusing on. And our Judge Sanchez is really good every week in telling them, look, if you guys want to go back and plea out your case, fine, go do that. You're still eligible for these services that we have down here. You don't have to be in vet court to contact these folks that are on the team to try to get some help. And so we tell them, regularly, if you know friends that need these services, call us, contact these same people that you're talking to. And so we can help them regardless of how their criminal case is going to be resolved.
In Bexar County, I think we really have a good staffing team. We have a good team. We call it Team VTC team. The prosecutor's part of that team. The defense counsel is part of that team. Probation is part of that team. The VA rep is part of that team. Center for Healthcare Services. Our different case managers and court managers are all part of that team. So, and Karen, you were there. You saw one of our staffings. It's pretty fluid. It's pretty good give and take that's going on. With respect to the defense counsel, sitting here on the front row, staring right back at me, wearing one of my blue shirts, or our blue shirts, excuse me, is Joe Pena. Joe is a Army, was on active duty, then reservist, JAG, is armor, then JAG, and has been a defense counsel and family attorney in San Antonio for some time. He's currently one of the defense counsel assigned to our court. Either he's there or the other attorney, Joanne DeHoyas, is their former judge. And so they know their role. And their first thing is first of all, taking care of their client. But sometimes taking care of that client is not fighting the system. Taking care of that client is encouraging that client to participate in the program and participate in treatment. and also to be truthful with the judge, be truthful with the court, because the judge is always asking, do you have a problem? Is there something we can help you with? Now, we've had a very low recidivism rate, extremely low. It's just amazing. We did have a young man about 2 weeks ago that decided he would rather be using heroin than dealing with his issue. And the judge said, well, you know, I can either put you in a drug treatment program or I can send you to jail. We wanted him to go to the treatment program, but he decided he'd rather go to jail. So he was, his probation was revoked and he went to jail. That's unusual because most of the time you can convince them that they need treatment. They need treatment. You know, this is the first day for the rest of your life that we're dealing with. And so we've had a very low recidivism rate. We've had a very low revocation of probation rate. And we want to keep it that way. We want to keep them focused on their treatment. And so when we do have an MTR, a motion to revoke probation, it's at that point, obviously, that the defense counsel needs to be in more of an adversarial role and make the state prove its case, and which generally is not too hard. But most of the time, they're working with the clients, encouraging truthfulness and encouraging treatment.
And I just wanted to add that our program is fairly new. We implemented the VTP program in 2013, and so we haven't been able to really track our recidivism rate. But one thing I can tell you is just from the testimonies that we receive from the participants, they will tell you, I've been on probation before and I've never received the services I'm receiving now. Why? Because it was always a different counselor. Now it's a veteran that understands what I've been through. And so it allows them an open door to be able to share whatever their emotions are, what the problem is. And so keeping that in mind, once we do track our recidivism, I'm sure we will be able to determine that it has gone down because of now the services that we're offering.
Yeah, it's a cost benefit, really. I mean, they get to weigh their rights, their Fifth Amendment rights to not say anything versus the benefit of getting the treatment and actually getting past it all. So, I mean, what you're offering there is a new start. So, they can either, say, hey, I'm not going to say anything, or they can tell you everything, right, and get the treatment and move forward and hopefully not be back there.
And so that's an issue that we see with the defense attorneys, where they know that there's these services available for their clients that the client potentially needs, but if it's a weak case, should the attorney fight the case or take it to a jury and possibly get an acquittal, and his client isn't going to get the services that he needs. And so that's an issue we've seen that our defense attorneys have brought up on different occasions.
We had an interesting situation here that came up recently. We had a participant, a veteran, who qualified, needed services. He was active duty, so we also take active duty participants. And this individual received a call from a colonel from JAG saying that they needed to know what the status of the case was, because if the case wasn't dismissed, that they were going to dishonorably discharge him. And so this came to light after the fact. I was told a week after the DA, I guess, figured it was a weak case anyway. He dismissed the case, thinking he was helping the person. But I was concerned about that. I said, well, if this person needed help, needed treatment, it had been clinically assessed, then are we really helping him? And so maybe there needs to be a little more flexibility. That's one of the things we may want to testify to tomorrow, is to see if perhaps we can have them change the language of the statute, and maybe we can discuss it a little bit later. But if a person has a pending case at the time of referral, even if it gets dismissed along the way, that they can still participate in the program and still receive services, whether grant funded or otherwise. Because I think we need to look at the big picture. What are we really trying to accomplish? And are we helping this person by dismissing the case and just not putting him in a financial situation where he now doesn't have a job and discharged dishonorably? Anyway, just a very interesting situation that we had come up recently.
Yeah, and one of the things that we had to decide as well before we went into pretrial diversion And under our traditional pretrial diversion program, we would take anything up to a state jail felony. They would go in, plead guilty, be admonished by the judge of their conditions, yada, 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 and they go on down the road. With this, we do not require a plea of guilty first, because we didn't want them to be thinking, well, I'm going to go and fight this. Now, this is a voluntary program. We want them to come in and feel that they can come in and get services. If it doesn't work out, you haven't given up your right to a trial. You haven't, somehow compromised the defenses you may have. So if they feel there is maybe a weak case, there are some holes in it, they don't have that incentive so much, because we're not requiring them to plead guilty before we accept them into the court. You may not want to go that route. It just depends on how you want to do it. But I think by making them plead guilty, that would really make more difficulty in selling it to their attorney, especially if you're only doing misdemeanors. And I used to do defense work too. I'd have a hard time selling this to my clients for a misdemeanor. You want 3 days in jail, or you want the next year with someone babysitting you every week?
Every week.
Not give me my 3 days, I'm out of here. So it's a tough sell if they're not getting that dismissal or something.
I think that's what we're finding in regards to active duty and reservists, is selling it to their commanders that it isn't as simple as just discharging them or administratively discharging them. This is actually a program that benefits them, ultimately benefits their soldier by bringing them back in a component that they're actually able to function better, perhaps even be a mentor to others, who have come back from the sand or whatever. But we're finding that the active duty folks and the reservists don't really have a clear understanding of what the VTCs do. And that, again, that's probably part of the evolutionary process for the VTCs to, try and reach to the active duty reservist component.
That's a good point, Joe. That's a good point. Randy, I wanted to ask you your thoughts, from continuing along this line of the defense attorney perspective, and how you balance that, getting them into a program like this, where there is a lot more work involved versus just doing the 3 days and getting out of jail.
The first thing that's important, I think, when you get the case, is the defense counsel must review the facts to determine what kind of case there is. I was a prosecutor. Most of the time, the police get it right. They've got solid cases that are brought in. However, there's also those occasions when it's a weak case and a case that needs to be fought. And so the first thing is the defense counsel needs to review the case up front, know the facts, investigate the underlying facts, and really engage with the client to determine, okay, what happened. And then I think the next thing is you have to understand, or make the client understand, that when he goes into this kind of program, he's going to be waiving certain rights. And there's going to be pressures on the client to go ahead and get into the program, because treatment is the best way to go. Now, you're right. Some of them may want to do the 3 days in jail, but in Bexar County, it won't be 3 days in jail. It'll be more than that. And at the same time, some of the offers that we get back from the district attorney's office are not great. And there are many occasions where the defense counsel will opt in our county to have a case handled outside the VTC. Even if it's handled outside the VTC, we make the veteran know that services are available to him or to her through the VA or through our Center for Healthcare Services here in San Antonio. So I think it's important, if you're a defense counsel like Joe is on our team, to encourage treatment, because we're looking forward to the day when this person perhaps doesn't have that problem and can reintegrate into society and be a productive member of our society.
So what about, and I'll pose this to all of you, what about a situation where, say, you're a defense attorney and you find out from your client that they've, gone back to drugs or alcohol or whatever, and, the court's probably going to find out. They may not find out, and how do you balance that, the protection of the client versus, the duty to keep your team together on your court. I mean, do you know where I'm going with this?
Well, yeah. You, first of all, your duty is to, as a defense attorney, your duty is to your client. So, but, if he or she has been abusing drugs or abusing alcohol, probation is going to find out about it, particularly in our county, because they're being tested all the time. And so it's not a question of when they're going to find out or if they're going to find out, it's about when they're going to find out, because they're going to find out. And if you're really focused on, at that point, if you're focused on truthfulness, then you want your client to be truthful with the court and seek the treatment that he or she needs. So they're going to find out. And so you want your client to be truthful because they'll get more out of the program. My judge again is Wayne Christian. He was here. You saw him. If you tell him the truth, he's going to accept that. And he will work with the soldier, with the client, with the participant to get them the treatment they need. They're going to fall back. I mean, they're not always going to be positive going forward. There are going to be relapses along the way. So if there's a relapse, okay, but tell the judge the truth. And at least in our court, you tell the judge the truth. There's been a relapse, okay, we'll get past that. But lying to the judge is the worst thing you can do in our court.
Yeah, I would commend Judge Sanchez, not just because he's standing here.
Oh, sure.
But he did a really great job from the very beginning. So those of you that are just starting up your courts, of establishing the fact that there are consequences. So if they come in and they confess, and we've had several guys that say they told either their probation officer or their counselor or somebody that, hey, I messed up last weekend, I fell off the wagon, and they get sanctioned. And they come in expecting to be sanctioned. But they're still honest and upfront enough to divulge that information. Because it's a fair sanction, they understand it, they're there voluntarily, they want the help, they know if they mess up, there's consequences. And you have to establish that expectation from the very beginning and then be consistent with it. And so they talk about sanctions and rewards and all that, and you really need to have those established and applied. And they'll respond to it. I don't think there's going to be a problem.
True. But Karen, typically I think it's rare that the treatment team finds out, or that in staffing that we find out from the defense attorney that the client is using or has relapsed. It typically comes either from the case manager or treatment will, without divulging too much, will hint to something that he's off track.
So I think where we're going with this then is it's important to have a robust program where you're doing this testing at regular intervals, and they understand when they enter the program that they're going to be tested and these things are going to come out, so they know going in. Would you agree that they won't be able to hide that?
Yeah, and also holding them accountable to the group. They're accountable to everybody else that's participating in the court, not just themselves and their family. But when they do mess up, they get to turn around in court and look at everybody that's sitting there for a couple hours with them and explain why they messed up that weekend. It's good, at least the response that we've seen, and they actually seem to exhibit remorse. And they feel probably more remorse for letting down their fellow vets than sometimes the act itself. So I think it's a very helpful situation, environment for that.
And that's a big difference, if I may. That's a big difference that I've seen as the judge of the sobriety treatment program, and also helping Judge Hill with the VTP program, is the difference in participants. In the sobriety treatment program, the participant will deny, and come up with excuses and stories. And I thought it was Gatorade, and I brushed my teeth 3 times before I came, and scope, right, the whole extreme. And with VTP, the participants are different. These are military men and women that come to terms with the mistakes they've made, and they come, and like Judge Hale said earlier, they are already imposing their own sanction before they even come before the judge. And so that's a big difference that I've seen from these intensive programs where it's VTP and STP.
We've actually had some of the participants apologize to the other participants in
absolutely.
court. You'll say, I want to apologize to the court, I want to apologize to the staff, I want to apologize to my fellow participants for not complying. You don't see that in regular drug court. One of the things we started doing in our regular drug court is we actually have polygraph exams as an option. When they challenge the UAs, I don't know how that happened, couldn't happen. Well, we have a polygraph exam. If you pass it, we'll pay for it. You fail, you pay for it, and you're looking at a week in jail.
Instead of 2
You know
days.
exactly what you're looking at. And some of them will say, okay, I'll take it, and don't think it's going to be easy. Don't think you're not being truthful. We'll find out. And sure enough, it's worked several times to the point. Sometimes they'll challenge it at first, and then that's up to wait until after the doc. I'm done with the docket, and they'll ask to approach afterwards. Judge, I want to. Can I approach? I don't want to tell you the truth now. So it works.
Well, I don't want to give this guy's name away, but Joe, you remember this big soldier, big guy. We had a scram bracelet on him, and that's great. You know, he kept showing up that he was using alcohol, or at least a bad reading, or he was monkeying with the system or doing something. And he swore up and down that he wasn't abusing alcohol. Well, he got caught, and he was. So he finally had to suck up and tell the truth. He ended up in a 28-day program at a Villa Serena, the VA inpatient program, and he passed that. He went in kicking and screaming, but he passed it, and he came out feeling a whole lot better. And you know what? He's turned himself around. He's turned his life around. It was tough, but he did that. I learned a whole lot more about scram that I didn't know. And so that was a positive tool as well. But polygraphs, cool.
They do work.
I hate them, but still.
So how many strikes do you give them before they're out of the program?
I don't know. It's case by case. You know, it's up to the judge. Again, he encourages truthfulness. You fess up, you tell the truth. He'll work with you. That's all part of the process.
It depends on what the strike is.
Yeah.
All strikes are not created equal.
This is so true.
Yeah, it just depends.
Sometimes we go through the termination hearing, and even if I'm pretty sure I'm not inclined to terminate, and I'm talking about the regular drug court, we're not there, veterans court yet, but just so they can go through the process, have the defense attorney, advocate for them, and have them realize how close they are to being terminated from the program, and then I'll put them on zero tolerance. You miss one meeting, one negative UA, or one positive UA, and you're out. And it's on you now. And it's going to be administratively. You're not going to get another hearing. This is your due process right now. And so, but as far as how many strikes before they get to that point, well, again, case by case, I agree. It depends on what did they miss meetings, that they, to me, missing meetings and trying to find excuses for that is probably more difficult for me to accept than a positive UA during their first phase or the first 3 months in the program. Because we expect them to test positive. But when they're not making the effort, not showing up, they can't get help. If you don't show up, how can we help you?
Well, they're probably also doing the other part of that.
Of course. That's why
they're not there.
Yes.
Right, yeah. Well, I'm going to turn things over to the audience for questions, but I want to touch base with all of you and make sure there's not something we left out in our discussion that you wanted to cover before we let them loose on you. Randy?
In my role now as the VTC project director, one of the things that a lot of times before the court starts, I'll be in front of the group and I'll be talking about different things that are going on. And for example, I'll bring in someone from the Texas Veterans Commission for an appointment. And so, you need a job? See this lady right here. Okay? Sometimes there'll be someone there helping with housing issues. Anytime there's a job fair going on, we put that information out so that we make sure that our veterans know about that. But the other thing that I do a lot of times is as I remind them, you're here to take care of each other as well. How you do impacts on this program. how you do in this program impacts upon our ability to go forward and grow this program or help other veterans in the future. So we need their buy-in to that they are an important part of the program. Just like this leave no veteran behind thing. I mean, that's serious in our court. We cannot and we will not leave these people behind. And we want them to understand that they cannot leave each other behind. And so when they graduate, they know that they've been part of a team, part of a program, part of a program where they're trying to help each other. And so that to us is just really important.
Randy, tell them about that graduate who brought in the arresting officer.
Go to Veterans Treatment Court, Bear County on Facebook, and you'll see, I'm sorry, there's a picture there of Corporal Valdez from the United States Marine Corps. When he graduated, and this is the first time it's ever happened, hadn't happened since then, but when he graduated, he asked there was a San Antonio police officer sitting there off to the side. I didn't know who it was. And when he was invited to come up, and after Judge Christian presented him with his VTC coin, Officer Peralta, San Antonio police officer, came up there and was standing right next to Valdez, Marine Corps, and he said, "This is Officer Peralta. He arrested me on my second DWI. He saved my life." He presented his coin to Officer Peralta. That picture is on our Facebook site. That was a very powerful moment in our court. He also had Trivanese, our VJO there, who helped him through the program as well. So this program works, and it's very powerful. And what these youngsters say, and I can call them kids as well, because they're all a lot younger than me. Well, we do have a few Vietnam era veterans in our court. But they're all youngsters, and this program does work, and it does help them. But you'll see his picture on my Facebook site. We're really proud of him and him going forward. But he was so appreciative of this officer arresting him. That's unusual, but it's very powerful.
I guess the only thing I would say from the prosecutor perspective, if you try a first-degree felony to a jury and get a conviction and a life sentence, you're going to be applauded in the office, and everyone's going to be high-fiving you and saying what a great job you did. But if you graduate 10 people from the Veterans Court, nobody's going to even notice. But I think the mandate that we seek, not just conviction, but that justice is done, has been equally served in both of those situations. If you don't have that kind of attitude or perspective towards these types of programs, then you probably aren't going to be enjoying it, and it probably isn't going to last and be very successful. But I think that's what we need to focus on, and from the prosecutor side, it's, when I was a police officer, for a time I was a school resource officer, and nobody had any respect for them either. But working with the kids and helping them stay out of trouble is at least as important as taking people off the street. And so if you're going to be a prosecutor and you're going to be involved in this kind of stuff, you need to have that perspective, or else you're going to hate your job.
So true. Yes, ma'am.
How do you all handle participants who maybe by certain events that occur with them, with their other relationships, end up having new cases filed against them while they're in the Veterans Court? Well, I have a participant that has 3 children, all from different moms, and as a result, sometimes he's having arguments, or the moms are having arguments with each other, and they come to his house, and then he's the one that ends up getting arrested. How do you all handle maybe cases that are filed against the participants while they're still in treatment court?
How do we handle it? You're talking about the DA's office? Is there a new case? Do you allow them to continue in the program? Or because again, it does go back to the DA's office whether or not they want to.
So is that for me?
Yes.
I'm thinking because if they get referred and accepted, we have had
You're in the
some.
program already.
We've had some cases. I understand some people who are in the program, but they get a new charge. We'll continue. They're not going to get automatically terminated from the program, but if the new charge is a higher category felony and the DA does not want to offer even probation, then they may not be able to comply with the program anymore, so it makes it difficult. But ultimately, it goes back to whether or not the DA's office agrees to also join that case. Or sometimes they'll hold back on the case. They'll say, look, if you comply with that one, then we may terminate that one. We'll decide what we do with this one later. But at least that's how it works in Webb County.
And we do the same thing. Like I say, with my position being in the intake area, I can intercept cases as soon as they come in. So they tell us, hey, I've got a new offense that I just committed, so I'll keep an eye out for it when it comes in. I'll look at the facts of the case. Maybe it's garbage and we're going to just dismiss it anyway. And we would take it through the regular intake process. If it is a valid case, but it's not as serious as what we're already dealing with, then we'll hold it back and just deal with it later and make it part of what they're doing already. If it is a more serious one, I haven't had that come up yet, but then we would just readdress that as well.
And sometimes even if it's a weak case, just by holding it back, it serves as an incentive for them to do well because they know that there's another case that may be filed, even though the DA may not want to file it.
Yeah, and I've also had some of them where they had one case already filed, they were reluctant, they didn't really want to come into the program, and then we tell them, oh, we've got these other 3 also that are coming in the next few weeks, and then all of a sudden, okay, yeah, maybe I do want to do Veterans Court after all. And so that'll help give them the incentive to start the program sometimes as well.
So far, we've always kept them in the program. And then we deal with the other case case by case. I think we've got one pending right now that basically, I think the DA said, you satisfactorily complete the VTC, and then we'll probably dismiss that one. The second one came along.
Great question. Do you have any more? Yes, sir.
I have a question for Cameron and Bear County. Earlier in the session, you guys were talking about, well, first, thank you all for being here and for setting up the courts for veterans. I'm not a prosecutor, but I am a veteran, combat veteran. We've done several tours to different parts of the world. And I would like to say that I heard something that was a little bit disturbing to me as a veteran. You guys were saying that felonies, thieves, once a thief, always a thief. I would ask you to please think back and look and see why the gentleman or female, the soldier, the sailor, the airman, the Marine, why he or she is stealing. It could be to help pay for that drug habit that he's becoming self-medicated because he's not getting the services he or she deserves at the VA clinic and are entitled to them. I don't even want to say deserve. I'll go ahead and use the word entitled. So don't be so quick, in my opinion, to just go ahead and judge and say, oh, he's a thief, it's a felony theft. Like, don't be my opinion to you is not to do that. I mean, look in the background and see what the real problem is.
Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah, and I've maybe misperception out there that we do that. I mean, if we can still show, for instance, some of our Vietnam era veterans that are homeless, that are shoplifting all the time, and they might come in. Obviously, there is that connection there. With their whole lifestyle is falling apart, and so yeah, that would be something we would still consider putting in there. So we do look at the entire thing. I just throwing out an example of maybe a bribery that you wouldn't be able to make that connection.
Right.
But if you can make that connection, certainly.
And the other one I agree with sex offenders is that the PTSD to me, I would have to agree with you. When you're offending me, you make that connection.
Yeah.
But so I agree with you on that. I just didn't quite agree on the thievery part.
We will look at all of that.
Well, the problem is, theft is a crime of moral turpitude. And generally, you look at your moral compass, and I guess I can see the situation where a person's homeless and they haven't eaten and they need to eat. Maybe that's different, but we'll take a look at that. But so far, I don't think we have any theft cases at all. We've got criminal mischief cases, threats and that kind of thing, but I don't think we've seen any theft, except in any kind of theft cases.
We don't have a lot of theft cases either. Mostly
But that's a good point.
It is a good point.
Yes, sir.
I've got a question. We're fairly new starting when we actually have a docket, not a court, but we're having some kind of issues with jurisdictional things like dealing with individuals on probation. And so where they have maybe a new charge, but their original judge of probation, our judge is kind of like, there's two judges handling cases. And so, or somebody like in a different part of the state even. Any recommendations I can bring back to the legal team on the VJO on how to deal with that? Because we're fairly new, we don't have a court, we have a docket. And it'll be some judges even in the same courthouse. I know that doesn't ever happen, but in our area it does. And then some judges in different areas of the state. The veteran's living in our area, but his own original probation charges in another area of the state.
If I can address that, there was actually an interesting point made earlier. I was at the sitting here at the earlier panel, and there was some talk about, I think it was Judge Denton who mentioned it, or maybe Judge Christian. Hayes County, Travis County, perhaps you have someone who lives in Travis County, goes for the weekend to Hayes County, gets a DWI, but works in Travis County. They're eligible, meet the criteria for drug court in Hayes County, but it's just going to be difficult for them to participate because of where they reside. So one of the ideas that they thought of was perhaps not necessarily transferring jurisdiction, but maybe transferring the monitoring of a case. And of course, you have to have the cooperation of the two judges.
I think that was the C word was the issue.
Cooperation.
Yeah, when you have a discooperative, an uncooperative judge.
Just another C word, communication, I guess. And that happens everywhere, though. Even we've dealt with that issue. As a matter of fact, we talked to someone from the probation department recently, and they said, well, we have these two cases that we've identified. They're veterans, and I think they meet the criteria. They haven't been clinically assessed yet, but we talked to the judge of the presiding court, and he's not in favor of it. I said, if your department identifies this individual as someone who is in need of these services, the services are available. We have a grant for that. So it's not going to be added as a condition. I think if it's not added as a condition, obviously we can't revoke, at least not for Veterans Court, an individual for not compliance, because they can withdraw the way the statute reads at any point. Doesn't distinguish between probation or not. So we encourage the probation department to look into on a case-by-case basis. We all keep using that term, and if they're eligible, to refer them. And I mean, we communicate with the judges, and I plan on communicating with this particular judge to see what the problem is, if any, on the referral issue. But what I did, and what we did actually together, I sent a letter to the local sheriff, to the probation director, to the other judges, telling them, look, we have this grant, we have these services available. Please look at your docket or look at your caseload, identify any veterans who may be eligible for these services, because we want to make sure that these services are available to all eligible veterans. And so we put them on notice, here it is, and hopefully they'll respond to that, and if not, we'll follow up. Hey, we put you on notice. Why didn't you give these veterans the opportunity to participate in this program? We notified you, here's a letter, here's an email. Those are some of the things we've done.
I think we have time for one more question. Someone out there? Yes, sir.
You're considering type and severity of offenses and the veteran's clinical condition when you decide on eligibility for the court program?
Correct.
Do you also assess criminogenic risk as a factor, or look at that?
We look at their history a little bit. I think if you've been to the national training thing, that's one of the main differences between our traditional pretrial program, which is for strictly first offenders for less serious, and those that come into these programs have, I think, an average of 4, I think, somebody correct me if the number's wrong, but 4 prior arrests. So by the time they get referred into a vet court, you're not going to have a first offender usually. So you have to, consider their previous history. But that's about as far as it goes. Again, if those offenses are still just more of the same that we want to address, then that won't disqualify them. Those that have prior that I do disqualify are usually ones that have been to prison on their previous ones that were serious offenses. And you're not keeping their record clean for any purpose. You're telling them, look, just go plead. You can still get these services. Here's these people. We'll hook you up with the services, but no, you're just going to have to go to prison. So that does happen.
Okay. Judge Hale?
Oh, yes, I just wanted to make a comment on something. First of all, how many veterans do we have here?
Wow.
I want to commend you on your service.
Thank you.
two of our mentors, JJ and Barry, are Vietnam combat veterans, and they volunteered. They're there at every court session. Do we have any other Vietnam veterans in the audience here? I was not a veteran, but my father was a Vietnam combat veteran, a good friend of theirs. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, Purple Heart recipient. And my uncle Gary and I wrote something specifically for Vietnam veterans. And I kept hearing stories from my father's friends, my father, not so much my father, he wouldn't comment too much about it, but about the fact that Vietnam veterans, when they returned back from the war, they really didn't get a welcome home. Matter of fact, I think they were criticized more than anything, called baby killers and whatnot. And so a year ago, my uncle served in the Army, and during the Vietnam era, he didn't go to conflict because he joined in '73. And so he wrote the first part of this poem, and I wrote the second part. I just want to share it and dedicate it to our Vietnam veterans, anyone else here who was a Vietnam veteran as well. And it's entitled Vietnam Soldier's Prayer. Windswept orange clouds of rumble and roar, pour heavenly anger and echo fierce battles being fought down below. This unexplained war goes on in every jungle, in every village, in every hamlet, on every shore. Dear God, please help stop all this killing of brother by brother. We humbly implore. Take us back safely from these Vietnam jungles, these muddy brown rivers, to American shores. Please let us go home. And should our brothers go missing or not make it home, please comfort their families and do let them know that they are with you, that they will suffer no more, and that they were welcome home as they walk in through heaven's door, and that one day we'll see them once more when all the rumble and roar has subsided and all the wars of the world have ended. But from now till that end, please forgive us and help us learn to forgive, and bring peace upon us so that we all may live and let live. Thank you, O Lord, for this silent moment of peace. Dedicated to the Vietnam veterans. And by the way, Judge Paloma's late uncle died on November 11, 1967 in Vietnam. So that's where our passion comes from. Again, we're not veterans, but we have veterans in our family, and our motto actually that we came up with also is, our veterans serve to protect us, now we must serve to protect them. So, thank you all again.
Thank you.